Please, she whispered, her hands shaking. If you knew who I really was, you'd never have spoken to me again. Before we dive into this story, I need to know something. Have you ever helped someone, only to find out they were hiding the truth from you? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if you've ever believed that kindness can change fate, hit that subscribe button. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. It was a cold morning in Cedar Creek, Ohio, the kind of small town where everyone nods at each other, but few stop to talk. Ethan Cole parked his old Ford truck beside the corner coffee stand, same as every weekday at 6:45 a.m. His son, Noah, sat in the back seat wrapped in a blanket, scrolling on his tablet. Hot chocolate today? Ethan asked, half smiling in the rearview. Noah nodded, not looking up. Extra marshmallows. Ethan stepped out into the chill, rubbing his hands together as steam rose from the small silver trailer that served coffee to half the town. That's when he saw her again. The same woman he'd seen every morning for 3 weeks. Grace Miller. Tall, with dark hair always tied neatly back, dressed too nice for a roadside coffee line. He'd first noticed her when she dropped her keys, and he'd picked them up before she could. Then, every morning after that, she'd be there. Same order, same smile, same polite thank you. Today was no different, except she looked tired, distracted. Rough morning? Ethan asked lightly. Grace blinked, caught off guard. Oh, just didn't sleep much. He chuckled. Join the club. Parenting'll do that to you. Her eyes flickered toward his truck. That your son? Yeah, Noah. 8 years old. Thinks he runs the place. Grace smiled faintly, but there was something unreadable behind it, like she knew the weight behind his joke. The line moved. Ethan handed her a napkin that had fallen from her tray. Their fingers brushed for half a second, just enough for her to freeze. Thanks, she murmured, pulling her hand back quickly. You okay? He asked, noticing her pale expression. Fine, she said too quickly. Then softer. You just remind me of someone. He raised an eyebrow. Good someone or bad someone? Grace didn't answer. She just looked at him for a long moment, then turned toward her car. As she left, Noah called from the truck window. Dad, you're gonna spill your coffee again. Ethan laughed, shaking his head. He keeps me humble. But as he climbed back into the truck, he caught Grace glancing at them from her car mirror. Not just a casual glance, something deeper. Like she knew him, like she'd been waiting for him. Over the next few weeks, the pattern continued. Same time, same place, same quiet conversation that felt harmless, almost comforting. But Ethan started noticing things. Grace never stayed long. She never used her phone, never seemed to meet anyone. Some mornings, she'd look like she hadn't slept at all. Then one day, as snow began to fall again, she didn't show up. Ethan waited an extra 10 minutes before driving off, feeling an odd emptiness in the silence beside him. Dad, Noah said. Where's the coffee lady? He smiled faintly. Guess she's sleeping in. But she wasn't, because the next morning, when she returned, she looked like she'd been crying. Morning, Ethan said, studying her face. Morning, she whispered, voice hoarse. You okay? She hesitated. Can I ask you something? Sure. You come here every day, she said. Why? He shrugged. Habit. Routine. It's quiet here before the day starts. Helps me think. About what? He smiled faintly. My wife. She passed a few years ago. So, I try to start the day doing something normal. Something steady. Grace's breath caught, though she hid it well. I'm sorry. He nodded. Yeah, me too. She wanted to say more, he could tell. But instead, she just whispered, You're a good man, Ethan. He looked up sharply. I don't remember telling you my name. Her eyes widened. Then she looked away. You didn't. And before he could ask, she was gone. The next morning, Ethan pulled into the same parking spot by the coffee stand. The sky was low and gray, the kind of quiet that came before snow. He wasn't expecting her. He told himself it didn't matter if she showed or not, but his eyes kept flicking toward that same silver sedan. When it rolled up 5 minutes later, his chest tightened before he could stop it. Grace stepped out, clutching her coat around her. She looked different, pale, tense, like she'd been carrying something too heavy for too long. He lifted his cup in greeting. "Hey, you're early." She hesitated before answering. "There's something I need to say." Ethan frowned. "Sure. Everything okay?" Grace shook her head, eyes glistening. "No, but it will be." There was a pause between them, one of those moments when sound seemed to vanish, leaving only breath. "Ethan," she said quietly, "I knew your wife." The world seemed to tilt. He blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" Grace swallowed. "Her name was Rachel, right?" He felt the name like a punch in his chest. "Yeah." "You, how?" Grace looked down, voice trembling. "She was my nurse." Ethan's mind raced. "Rachel never mentioned you." "She wouldn't have," Grace said softly. "I wasn't supposed to get close to patients' families, but she and we talked. A lot. She told me about you, about Noah, about how much she loved you both." Ethan just stared at her, the sound of coffee orders and car engines fading around them. After a long silence, he finally asked, "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because she made me promise something," Grace said, "and I've been too scared to keep that promise. Until now." Ethan's voice was low. "What promise?" Grace blinked back tears. "To find you one day, to tell you that her last words weren't about her pain. They were about you and Noah." He didn't speak, couldn't. For a moment, all he could hear was his son's laughter from the truck, muffled through the glass. Grace continued, barely above a whisper. She said, "Tell Ethan not to stop living. Tell him to keep showing up." Ethan felt his throat tighten. He turned away, jaw clenched, eyes burning. "I'm sorry," Grace said. "I should have come sooner, but I was scared you'd hate me. I thought you'd blame me for what happened." He looked at her, eyes sharp now. "Why would I blame you?" Grace hesitated. "Because I was there when it happened. I was the one who—" She trailed off. "Who what?" "I was supposed to be watching her that night," she whispered. "But I stepped out for 5 minutes. Just 5. When I came back." She didn't finish. Ethan felt the air leave his chest. The sound of the espresso machine whined in the background, but everything else blurred. The cars, the voices, the smell of coffee, until all that was left was the sound of his heart pounding in his ears. He wanted to say something, anything, but all that came out was a hoarse whisper. "You were there." Grace nodded, tears falling freely now. "I've lived with that guilt every day. When I saw you here that first morning, I wanted to run. But something made me stay. Maybe because I thought, maybe helping you could help me, too." Ethan's voice cracked. "You should have told me." "I know," she said softly. "But I didn't want to make your pain worse." He looked at her for a long moment, torn between anger and heartbreak. "You already did." Grace nodded. "I know." She turned, walking toward her car, her steps uneven. For a moment, Ethan thought of letting her go. It would have been easier, to stay angry, to stay safe inside the hurt he knew so well. But then he looked at his son's reflection in the truck window, small, curious, waiting. And he realized this wasn't just about him anymore. He took a deep breath and called out, "Grace." She stopped, shoulders tense. He walked closer, voice lower now. "You said you've been coming here because of a promise. What about now? Why keep showing up?" She turned, eyes red. "Because I wanted to see if you'd kept yours." "My what?" She smiled faintly through tears. "She said you'd keep showing up. Every morning. Even when it hurt." Ethan stared at her, speechless. For a moment, time felt suspended. Just a man, a woman, and the quiet truth between them. Grace stepped back, wiping her face. "I shouldn't have told you like this. I'm sorry." And before he could answer, she got in her car and drove away. Ethan stood there long after she was gone, snow starting to fall around him. He didn't feel the cold. He didn't even notice when the barista called his name for his order. All he could hear was Rachel's voice in his mind, soft and steady, the way she used to sound before the hospital, before the machines. Keep showing up. That night, After putting Noah to bed, Ethan sat at the kitchen table staring at his cold cup of coffee. He didn't know whether to be angry or grateful. Grace's words had ripped open old wounds, but they'd also brought him something he hadn't felt in years. Peace of her. Rachel. And for the first time in a long time, he whispered into the quiet, "I'm still here." Sometimes people carry guilt for years, thinking they don't deserve forgiveness. But what if forgiveness isn't something you earn? What if it's something you give? If that thought hit you even a little, don't just scroll past. Stay with this story. But as much as Ethan wanted to believe Grace's confession was the end of it, it was only the beginning. The next few mornings, Ethan didn't stop for coffee. He drove right past the little stand on Main Street, pretending not to see it, pretending not to think about her. Noah noticed. "Dad," he said one morning from the back seat, "you forgot your coffee again." Ethan forced a smile, trying to cut back. But that wasn't true. He just couldn't face her. Couldn't face what she'd said, or how it made him feel. Because every word Grace had spoken replayed in his mind like a song he couldn't shut off. "I knew your wife. She made me promise." He wanted to believe it had brought him peace, but it hadn't. It only made him wonder what else Grace knew. By the third day, his chest felt tight with the kind of tension that only comes from running from something that's already inside you. So that morning, instead of his usual drive, he parked near the park where Rachel used to take Noah. The winter air bit at his skin. The playground was empty, just swings creaking in the wind. He sat on a bench and watched Noah run ahead, laughing as his boots left tracks in the thin snow. It reminded him too much of her, of the mornings she'd sit right there, a cup of coffee in her hands, smiling at their son. He closed his eyes, whispering, "You'd probably tell me to stop being stubborn, huh?" When he opened them again, a car had pulled up nearby. Grace. She got out slowly, holding a paper bag and 2 cups. "I brought breakfast." He didn't say anything, just watched her walk toward him. "Don't worry," she said quietly. "I'm not here to talk about the past. Just coffee." Ethan took the cup she offered, more out of habit than anything. The warmth against his palms felt grounding. "How'd you know we'd be here?" he asked. Grace smiled faintly. "Your wife told me about this park. Said it was your favorite spot." Her words hit harder than she meant them to. He nodded, eyes fixed on the frozen lake. "You remember a lot, don't you?" "Too much," she whispered. They sat in silence for a while. 2 people connected by pain neither of them knew how to name. Finally, Ethan said, "I can't keep doing this." Grace's head turned. "Doing what?" "Talking to you. Seeing you. It's confusing." She nodded slowly. "I understand." He glanced at her. "Do you?" "Yes," she said, voice trembling. "Because every time I see you, I see what I took from you. And every time I don't, I feel like I'm losing the only piece of her I have left." Ethan looked away, jaw tight. "You didn't take her from me. Life did." Grace shook her head. "I could have stopped it." "You don't know that." She wiped her eyes. "I do." The wind picked up, swirling bits of snow across the playground. Noah ran up, holding a pine cone like treasure. "Look what I found," he said proudly. Grace smiled, crouching to his level. "That's a good one, Noah." He grinned. "You remember my name?" "Of course I do," she said softly. "Your mom used to tell me stories about you." Noah tilted his head. "You knew my mom?" Ethan stepped in quickly. "She worked at the hospital, bud." "Oh." Noah looked thoughtful. "Did she help Mom get better?" Grace froze. Ethan's chest ached. He wanted to step in, to change the subject, but he couldn't find the words. Grace finally nodded. "I tried, sweetheart." Noah smiled faintly. "Thanks for trying." Then he ran off again, leaving them both in silence. Grace looked at Ethan. "He's kind, just like her." Ethan swallowed hard. Yeah, he got that from her. They sat there until Noah's laughter faded into the wind. Finally, Grace stood. "I should go." Ethan nodded, eyes still on the lake. "Grace." She turned back. "I don't know what to do with all this," he said quietly. "You showing up. The things you said. It's too much." Grace's eyes softened. Then don't do anything. Not yet. Just let it sit. Why do you keep coming back? She gave a sad smile. Because I owe her. And maybe I owe you too. He didn't know what that meant, or maybe he did and didn't want to. When she left, he stayed there, watching her car disappear down the road. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He sat on the couch, a half-empty mug on the table. The house felt quiet in a way that made every memory louder. He pulled out the old photo album, the one Rachel had filled with pictures of Noah's first years. Between the pages, a folded note slipped out. It was her handwriting. Don't forget to show up, even when it hurts, especially then. He stared at the words, feeling his chest tighten. She'd written it years ago, but somehow it felt like she was answering him now. The next morning, Ethan returned to the coffee stand. The same smell of roasted beans. The same hum of the early crowd. Grace wasn't there. He almost felt relieved, until the barista handed him his cup and said, "That lady who usually talks to you? She paid for this earlier." Ethan froze. "She was here." "Yeah, said to tell you." The barista hesitated, searching for the words. "That she'll be back when you're ready." Ethan looked down at the cup in his hand. On the sleeve, written in neat handwriting, were 3 words. "I'll keep showing up." He let out a slow breath, his heart caught between anger and something softer he didn't want to name. He didn't know it yet, but fate was about to trap them together, and this time there'd be nowhere to run. 2 weeks passed. Ethan tried to fall back into his routine: work, school drop-offs, quick dinners, early nights. But no matter what he did, there was an ache he couldn't shake. Grace hadn't returned to the coffee stand. Still, every morning he stopped by. Part of him hoped to see her car pull up. Another part prayed she wouldn't. He didn't know what he'd say if she did. It was Friday morning when the universe decided for him. Ethan's truck sputtered to a stop on Route 27, just outside of town. The snow from the night before had turned the roads slick and uneven. He sighed, hitting the steering wheel. "Not today," he muttered. Noah sat in the passenger seat, bundled in his jacket. "Dad, are we stuck?" "Looks like it." He stepped out to check under the hood, his breath clouding in the air. That's when a familiar voice called from behind him. "Need a hand?" He turned, and there she was, Grace, standing by her car, coat zipped tight, holding a travel mug. Ethan blinked. "You've got to be kidding me." Grace smiled lightly. "I drive this way every morning. Guess fate's got a sense of humor." He chuckled dryly. "Yeah, seems like it." Without waiting for permission, Grace crouched beside him, peering under the hood. "Battery's dead." "You sure?" "Pretty sure. I worked at a clinic in the middle of nowhere once. Had to jump cars more than patients." Ethan gave her a look. "You carry jumper cables?" "Always." She opened her trunk, pulling them out with practiced ease. "You never know who you might need to save." Her words hung in the air a little too long. They worked in silence, the faint sound of traffic in the distance. Grace connected the cables, hands steady despite the cold. Ethan glanced at her. "You didn't have to stop." "I know," she said softly. "But I wanted to." He hesitated. "Why?" She looked up, meeting his eyes. "Because you would have done the same for me." When the engine roared back to life, Noah cheered from inside the truck. "Guess you're my hero today," Ethan said, half teasing. Grace smiled faintly. "Maybe we just saved each other a little." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The silence said enough. As she turned to leave, Noah rolled down the window. "You want a ride, Miss Grace? It's cold out." Ethan shot him a look. "Noah." Grace laughed. "I'm fine, sweetheart. But thank you." Noah grinned. "Mom used to say helping people keeps your heart warm." Grace froze, then smiled sadly. She was right. Ethan's chest tightened. Grace waved, heading back to her car. But just as she opened the door, the wind picked up, blowing snow hard across the road. She paused, shivering. Ethan sighed, tapping on his window. "Grace, just get in the truck. It's freezing." She hesitated, then nodded, climbing in the back seat beside Noah. The heater hummed, filling the cab with warmth and silence. The drive to town was short, but it felt like hours. Noah chatted about school and the snow, breaking the tension without even knowing it. Grace listened, smiling when he talked about his science project. Ethan watched her in the mirror. She didn't look like a woman running from guilt anymore. She looked tired, human. When they reached the diner on Main Street, Noah asked, "Can we get breakfast, Dad? Please." Ethan sighed. "We're already late." Grace smiled gently. "I'll buy. Least I can do." Ethan hesitated. "You don't have to." "Maybe I want to," she said softly. So they went inside. The diner smelled like coffee and pancakes, the kind of place where time seemed to move slower. They sat in a corner booth, sunlight breaking through the frosted windows. Grace stirred her coffee quietly. "It's funny. I used to come here after night shifts. Never thought I'd end up back in this town." Ethan looked up. "Why'd you leave?" "Too many memories," she said. "And too much silence." He nodded, understanding more than he wanted to. Noah slid into the booth beside her, handing her a menu. "You should try the blueberry pancakes. They're awesome." Grace smiled. "Blueberry, huh? That was your mom's favorite, wasn't it?" Ethan froze. Noah nodded, eyes wide. "Yeah. How'd you know that?" Grace glanced down, flustered. "Lucky guess." Ethan's voice was low. "Grace." But before he could say more, the waitress appeared, dropping off their plates. The tension broke for a moment. Noah dug into his pancakes while Grace picked at hers, lost in thought. Finally, she said quietly, "You know, I thought I was helping you that first morning. But maybe you were helping me." Ethan frowned. "How's that?" "You reminded me what it looks like to keep living." He didn't answer. He just stared at her for a moment, really looked at her, and saw how much weight she carried. Maybe she wasn't the villain his grief wanted her to be. Maybe she was just someone trying to make peace with her own ghosts. After breakfast, Grace offered to drive them home. But as they stood by their cars, Ethan said, "Hey, thanks for stopping earlier. And for breakfast." Grace smiled faintly. "Guess I just keep showing up, huh?" "Yeah," he said softly. "You do." As she turned to leave, he added quietly, "Grace, you don't have to keep proving you're sorry. You already have." She looked at him, eyes shining. "I'm not coming back for guilt anymore, Ethan." "Then why?" She smiled through a tear. "Because Rachel told me to make sure you never stopped showing up for yourself." I think she meant this too. He stood there, speechless, watching her walk to her car. "Have you ever been stuck with someone who made you feel too much? Tell me what happened. I want to hear your story." But the truth has a way of finding light. And Grace's truth was only half told. The rest was buried deeper than Ethan could imagine. The next few days felt different. Ethan caught himself thinking about Grace more often, not just about what she'd said, but how she'd said it. Every word had carried weight, like she'd been holding back something bigger. He told himself to let it go, to keep things simple. But nothing about this felt simple anymore. And on a rainy Thursday morning, everything came undone. He was fixing a shelf in the hardware store when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. "Ethan Cole?" a woman's voice said. "This is Sheriff Peterson. There's been a minor accident outside Cedar Creek. A woman listed you as her emergency contact." Ethan's heart skipped. "Who?" "Grace Miller." He didn't think. He just grabbed his jacket and ran. By the time he reached the small-town hospital, the rain had turned into sleet. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the smell of antiseptic thick in the air. Grace sat in the hallway, her arm wrapped in a sling, a thin blanket draped over her shoulders. When she saw him, her eyes softened. "You didn't have to come." He ignored that. "What happened?" "Car slid on the ice," she said with a weak smile. "Guess I should have listened to the weather report." He exhaled, relief washing over him. "You scared me." Her lips trembled, but she smiled. "Sorry about that." They sat in silence for a long time, the hum of the vending machine filling the space between them. Finally, Ethan said, "You listed me as your emergency contact." Grace looked down. "You're the only person I know here." Something about that hit him harder than it should have. He drove her home after they released her. She lived on the quiet side of town, in a small apartment above a florist shop. The building smelled faintly of lavender and dust. When he helped her inside, she said softly, "You don't have to stay." He looked around the empty room, neat but lifeless. "Someone should." Grace hesitated, then nodded. "Coffee's in the kitchen. I can manage, though." Ethan ignored her and started a pot anyway. They sat across from each other at the small kitchen table, steam curling between them. The rain tapped softly against the window. "Grace," he said finally, "what aren't you telling me?" Her eyes flickered, panic flashing for a second. "What do you mean? You've been carrying something since the day we met. Every time you talk about Rachel, it's like you're afraid to say too much. What else happened?" Grace's fingers tightened around her cup. "You don't want to know." "I think I do." She shook her head. "Ethan, if I tell you, you'll never look at me the same." He leaned forward. "Grace, just tell me the truth." Her voice broke when she finally spoke. "The night Rachel died, it wasn't an accident." The words hit like a wave. Ethan stared at her. "What are you talking about?" Grace swallowed, tears spilling down her face. She'd been getting weaker for days, and she didn't want to stay hooked up to the machines anymore. She begged me to take her outside, just for a few minutes. Said she wanted to feel the air again. Ethan's chest tightened. "And you did?" Grace nodded. "I wheeled her out to the courtyard. It was quiet. She looked at the sky and said it felt like peace. I told her I'd get her doctor, but when I turned around, she grabbed my hand and said, 'Don't.'" Ethan's hands trembled. "Grace." She didn't want to go back in. She knew it was time. Grace's voice cracked. "She made me promise I wouldn't tell anyone. Said it wasn't my fault. But I was her nurse. I was supposed to protect her. And instead, I watched her close her eyes and never open them again." The words hung heavy in the air. Rain pattered harder against the glass. Ethan stared at her, the sound muffled by the pounding of his heartbeat. He wanted to be angry. He wanted to yell, to say she should have done more. But all he could see was her face. Guilt, fear, and love tangled into one unbearable truth. "She trusted you," he said finally, voice raw. Grace nodded through tears. "And I failed her." "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "You didn't." She looked up, surprised. He swallowed hard. "If she asked you to do that, it's because she trusted you more than anyone. She wasn't scared. That means you gave her peace. You gave her something I couldn't." Grace's breath hitched. "You don't mean that." "I do," he said softly. "You were there when I couldn't be. You gave her what she needed most. Someone to listen." For the first time since they'd met, Grace broke down completely. She pressed her hand to her face, sobbing quietly. Ethan stood, walked around the table and knelt beside her. He didn't speak, just sat there, letting her cry, his own eyes wet. For a long time, the only sound was rain and quiet grief finally finding air. When Grace calmed, she whispered, "I thought you'd hate me." Ethan shook his head. "You've carried this alone long enough." She nodded, eyes red. "I didn't come to this town to find peace. I came to ask for forgiveness." He met her eyes. "Then you found it." Something inside both of them shifted. Not love, not yet, but something deeper. Understanding. Outside, the rain finally stopped. Grace whispered, "She told me something else that night. Said one day you'd need to hear it too." Ethan frowned. "What?" Grace looked at him through tears. She said, "Tell him that moving on doesn't mean letting go. It means carrying love differently." He closed his eyes, letting the words sink in. When he opened them, he found himself smiling faintly through the ache. "That sounds like her." Grace laughed weakly. "It does." Later that night, after he helped her settle in, he stood by the door. "You'll be okay?" Grace nodded. "I think I will now." He hesitated. "You know where to find me." She smiled softly. "I always do." Ethan lingered for a moment, watching her, before heading out into the quiet night. The air smelled of rain and earth, the the streets glistening under the lamplight. As he drove home, he realized something. For the first time in years, the grief in his chest felt a little lighter. Not gone, but softer. Sometimes forgiveness isn't about someone earning it. It's about setting yourself free from what hurts. If you've ever forgiven someone you thought you never could, stay with this story. But peace never comes without a price. And just when Ethan thought the worst was behind them, life reminded him how fragile healing can be. The next morning, Ethan woke up to sunlight spilling through the blinds and the smell of coffee from the kitchen. For a brief second, he felt at peace. Then his phone buzzed. It was a message from Grace. "Can we talk?" Something about it felt off. Short, uneasy. He texted back, "Of course." But hours passed before she replied. By late afternoon, she showed up at the hardware store. Her eyes red, her hands trembling. "Grace," he said, worried. "What's wrong?" She didn't answer right away. She just handed him a folded piece of paper. He opened it, a letterhead from Mason Family Estates. It was an eviction notice. "For me?" he asked, confused. Grace shook her head. "For the shop." Ethan blinked. "The whole building?" She nodded. "The property's being bought out. The new owner wants everyone out in 30 days. Ethan's chest tightened. That shop wasn't just a job. It was his father's legacy. The place where his son learned how to use a wrench. Who would do this? Grace looked away. "Ethan, it's me." The room went still. He frowned. "What are you talking about?" "I didn't know," she whispered. "Until this morning." Ethan felt the words land like a blow. "You bought the building?" "No, well, not me directly," she said quickly. "My family. My father's company handles these purchases. I found out when they sent me the report." "You knew," he said quietly. "I swear, I didn't." Ethan stepped back, shaking his head. "Grace, you told me you left that life behind." "I did. I don't have control over what they buy, Ethan." "But you knew today, and you didn't warn me?" Tears welled in her eyes. "I was going to. I came here to tell you first." Ethan turned away, anger boiling just beneath his voice. "Do you have any idea what this place means to me? To my son?" "Yes," she whispered, voice breaking. "That's why I came. I wanted to fix it before it hurt you." He stared at her, hurt written across his face. "You should have trusted me with the truth." Grace took a shaky step forward. "Please, Ethan, I didn't mean." He cut her off. "You talk about forgiveness and trust, but you're still living behind secrets. I opened up to you, and now I find out you're part of the reason I might lose everything." She looked like she wanted to reach for him, but she didn't dare. "I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't change anything." The words came out sharper than he meant, but he didn't take them back. Grace's lip trembled. She nodded slowly, tears spilling down. "I'll fix this," she whispered, "even if you never want to see me again." Then she walked out, the little bell above the door chiming behind her. A sound that suddenly felt like goodbye. That night, the shop felt different. Empty. Ethan stayed late, sitting on a wooden stool behind the counter, the lights dim. His son, Jake, played quietly in the corner with a set of toy trucks. "Dad," Jake said after a while, "are we moving again?" Ethan's throat tightened. "I don't know, buddy." Jake frowned. "You look sad." Ethan forced a smile. "Just tired." The boy nodded and went back to playing, humming softly to himself. Outside, the wind howled through the empty street. The for sale sign across the road creaked back and forth. Ethan stared at the shop's old photograph on the wall. His dad standing by the door, proud, grease on his hands. He remembered his father's words. "This place isn't about money. It's about people. Help them, and they'll never forget you." He wondered what his father would say now. Meanwhile, across town, Grace sat in her car outside her father's office building. Glass, steel, and everything she'd spent years trying to escape. She stared at the elevator doors, her heart pounding. She hadn't stepped into that building in years. But she couldn't lose Ethan. Not after everything. Inside, her father, Richard Miller, barely looked up from his desk. "Grace, didn't expect to see you." She stood tall, though her hands were shaking. You need to cancel the Cedar Creek deal. He looked up, amused. That tiny town? Hardly worth a visit. It's worth it to me. He sighed. Grace, this is business. You know how this works. It's not business, she said firmly. It's someone's home. Someone's life. Richard's gaze hardened. And since when do you care about some small-town mechanic? Grace didn't blink. Since he reminded me what real people look like when they work for something. Her father leaned back, smirking. Ah, so this is about him. Grace glared. This is about doing the right thing. Richard shrugged. You left this world, Grace. Don't act like you get to tell me how to run it now. I'm not asking, she said quietly. I'm telling you, leave Cedar Creek alone. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then Richard said, You always did let your heart make bad decisions. Grace clenched her fists. Then I guess I'll make another one. She turned and walked out before he could respond. By the time she reached her car, her phone buzzed. A message from her father's assistant. Your request has been denied. Her heart sank. For the first time in years, Grace felt powerless. But she wasn't done fighting. That night, she drove back to Ethan's shop. The lights were still on. She parked, walked up to the glass door, and watched him through it. Sitting there, elbows on his knees, face tired, lost. She wanted to go in to tell him she was trying. But she knew he wasn't ready to hear it. So she left a note on the door instead. It read, I'm not giving up on you or this place, even if you don't believe in me right now. Ethan found it the next morning. He read it twice, then 3 times. His jaw tightened, but his eyes softened. For the first time since the fight, he wondered if he'd been too harsh. He looked around the shop at the walls, the tools, the shelves. It wasn't just about business. It was about hope. And Grace somehow had become part of that. He folded the note carefully and tucked it into his pocket. The first step toward forgiveness had already begun, though neither of them knew it yet. Have you ever lost someone because you reacted before listening? Tell me below. Sometimes, silence can hurt more than words. But sometimes, breaking apart is what makes you rebuild stronger. And soon, one choice would force Ethan to see what Grace was willing to lose for him. The snow had melted by the time Ethan finally decided to drive out to the lake. It was early Saturday morning, the sun barely up, the air cold enough to make his breath visible. That lake had been his and Rachel's favorite spot, their quiet escape when life got too heavy. Now it was where he went to think. He parked by the old dock and sat for a while, staring at the still water. In his hand was the note Grace had left on the shop door. He'd read it every night that week. I'm not giving up on you or this place, even if you don't believe in me right now. He didn't know what to do with that. Part of him wanted to stay angry, it was easier. But another part, the quieter part, couldn't stop remembering how she'd looked that last morning. Scared, guilty, but honest. He sighed, folding the note again and slipping it into his jacket. Maybe he'd been wrong to shut her out. Across town, Grace sat in her small apartment, surrounded by stacks of papers and folders. She hadn't slept. Coffee cups littered the table. She'd been calling lawyers, accountants, even old friends from her father's company, trying to find a loophole, a way to undo the purchase. Finally, after hours of scrolling through contracts and documents, she found it. A clause in the property transfer. The original owner reserves the right to buy back the property within 30 days of notice. Her heart raced. That meant Ethan could reclaim the shop, if she could help him come up with the money. It wasn't much, but it was hope. By Monday morning, Grace stood outside the hardware store again, clutching the papers. Ethan was inside restocking shelves. When he looked up and saw her through the window, his face went cold. She walked in quietly. I need 5 minutes, she said softly. He didn't answer but didn't tell her to leave either. She laid the papers on the counter. I found a clause. You can buy the shop back. You just have to sign here and come up with the payment by the end of the month. Ethan looked at the papers, then at her. That's a lot of money, Grace. You think I've got that kind of cash sitting around? I know you don't, she said. That's why I want to help. He shook his head. No, I'm not taking your money. It's not charity, Ethan. Her voice trembled. It's a chance to make things right. He leaned on the counter, tired. You think money fixes everything? It doesn't. I know, she said quietly. That's not what I'm trying to fix. The air between them was heavy, years of pain, loss, misunderstanding pressing down all at once. Grace looked down, tears in her eyes. I can't change what happened with Rachel. I can't undo that accident or what my family's company did. But I can stop them from taking the one place that still feels like her. Ethan's eyes softened, but his voice stayed low. Why do you care so much? She swallowed. Because she saved my life before she lost hers. He froze. Grace's voice shook. That night, I was driving home after a 12-hour shift. I shouldn't have been on the road. I was exhausted. I hit black ice and slid across the lane. Rachel swerved to avoid me. Her car flipped. Ethan went still, his hands gripping the counter. Grace's tears fell freely now. I've lived every day knowing it should have been me. That's why I moved away. Why I couldn't stay here. Ethan stepped back, shock and grief mixing in his chest. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the shop lights. Finally, Ethan whispered, "You've been carrying that alone?" She nodded. "Every day." He turned away, staring out the window, his reflection pale in the glass. "All this time, I thought you were trying to make up for your family's money. I didn't realize." She took a step closer. "I wasn't trying to fix my guilt. I was trying to honor her. She saved me, Ethan. And I've spent every day since trying to live in a way she'd be proud of." He looked at her, and for the first time, there was no anger in his eyes, only heartbreak. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then, slowly, Ethan walked around the counter and stood in front of her. He didn't touch her. He just stood there, close enough for her to see the pain and forgiveness fighting for space in his eyes. "Grace," he said quietly, "I don't know how to carry that, but I think I'm done fighting the person who's been trying to make it right." Her breath hitched. He nodded toward the papers. "Let's do this together." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she nodded. Together. That evening, they sat side by side at his kitchen table. Old bills spread out, calculators glowing, coffee mugs half empty. They worked late into the night, trying to piece together how to raise the money. Grace offered to sell her car. Ethan called an old friend from high school who ran a construction crew. They brainstormed fundraisers, small-town sponsorships, community support. For hours, they didn't talk about the past. They just worked side by side. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt something that almost scared him. Hope. When Grace finally stood to leave, it was past midnight. Ethan walked her to the door. The porch light flickered, snowflakes beginning to fall again. She turned, shivering slightly. "You really think we can do it?" He smiled faintly. "We're going to try." For a moment, they stood there in silence, the air filled with everything they didn't say. Then she whispered, "Thank you, Ethan, for not hating me anymore." He shook his head slowly. "I never hated you, Grace. I just didn't know how to forgive you." She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Then maybe we're both learning." He looked at her for a long moment. "Drive safe, okay?" She smiled softly. "I will." As she turned to leave, Ethan's voice broke the silence once more. "Grace." She turned back. He hesitated, then said quietly, "If Rachel saw you now, I think she'd be proud of you too." Grace froze. Then she smiled through her tears and whispered, "That's all I ever needed to hear." She got in her car and drove off into the quiet night, the snow glimmering in her headlights like falling stars. But the story wasn't over yet. Because sometimes love doesn't bloom in grand gestures. It grows quietly, in forgiveness, in second chances, and in the courage to begin again. The next few weeks moved fast. Ethan and Grace threw themselves into saving the shop, and somehow the whole town followed. It started small flyers taped to diner windows, social media posts, people dropping by with coffee or baked goods. Then it grew. Old customers stopped in to buy tools they didn't even need. High schoolers set up a lemonade stand outside on Saturdays. The local paper ran a story titled Community Rallies to Save Cedar Creek's Heart. It wasn't just a business anymore, it had become a movement. Every morning, Grace arrived early, sleeves rolled up, ready to work. She helped stock shelves, take inventory, even sweep the floor. She'd never done anything like it before, but she didn't complain once. Ethan noticed. He'd glance over sometimes and catch her laughing with Jake, teaching him how to count change at the register, or wiping dust off an old shelf like it was the most important job in the world. One morning, she caught him watching and smiled. "You're staring," he smirked. "Just not used to seeing you with sawdust in your hair." She flicked a bit of it at him. "Maybe I'm more small town than you think." He chuckled. "Maybe you are." Their laughter filled the air, light and easy. For the first time, it didn't feel like work. Felt like home. By the end of the month, they were close, only a few thousand short. Grace offered to cover the rest from her savings, but Ethan shook his head. "No, we're doing this the right way, together, with everyone's help." So they planned one last push, a town fundraiser at the community center. The night of the event, the place was packed. Tables lined with food, handmade crafts, raffle prizes. Country music played from an old speaker in the corner. Kids ran around with balloons. Ethan stood by the entrance, wearing his best flannel and a hopeful smile. Grace stood beside him, her hair loose, simple, glowing under the soft lights. "You nervous?" she asked. He laughed softly. "Only if you count heartbeats." She smiled. "That's a yes." They walked inside together. The auction went better than either of them dreamed. Local farmers donated produce, families gave what they could, even the mayor pitched in. Halfway through, Ethan looked around at the faces. People he'd helped over the years, neighbors who'd never forgotten a favor or a kind word. He realized something then. This wasn't just his father's legacy anymore. It was theirs. When the final tally came in, the crowd erupted. They'd raised enough. More than enough. Ethan turned to Grace, disbelief in his eyes. "We did it." She smiled, tears shining. "No, you did." He shook his head. "We did." Before she could say anything else, Jake came running up, waving a cupcake. "Dad, Miss Grace, we saved the shop." Ethan lifted him up, grinning. "Yeah, we did, buddy." Grace laughed, brushing a tear from her cheek. "Guess miracles still happen in small towns." Ethan looked at her, his voice soft. "I think we make our own miracles." Later that night, after the crowd thinned and the music faded, Ethan found Grace outside by the steps, staring up at the sky. Snow had started to fall again. Quiet, steady, peaceful. He walked up beside her, hands in his pockets. "You planning to disappear again after this?" She smiled faintly. "You'd like that?" He shook his head. "No, not even a little." She looked at him, eyes gentle. "I don't know where I belong anymore, Ethan. I'm not my father's world. And I don't quite fit here either." He hesitated. "Maybe belonging isn't about where you're from. Maybe it's about who stays when things get hard." She blinked back tears. "And you'd want me to stay?" He smiled. "Grace, you already have." Her breath caught. For a long moment, neither said anything. The snow kept falling, the streetlights glowing around them like fireflies. Then Ethan took a step closer. "I spent so long blaming you for what happened," he said quietly. "But you were never the reason I was stuck." "I was." Her eyes shimmered. "You're not stuck anymore." He nodded. "No, not anymore." He reached for her hand. Slow, careful. And this time, she didn't pull away. It wasn't a grand moment. No big speech. No dramatic music. Just two people standing in the cold, holding on to something fragile and real. The next morning, the town gathered at the hardware store. The papers were signed. The shop was officially back in Ethan's name. As the crowd cheered, Grace stood to the side, watching with quiet pride. When it was done, Ethan walked over, holding out a key. "Thought you might want to do the honors." She blinked. "Me?" He nodded. "You helped save this place. You should be the one to open it." Grace smiled, her hand trembling slightly as she turned the key in the door. The sign flipped from closed to open. The crowd clapped and whistled, and for a moment, all she could do was laugh. Ethan leaned in and said softly, "Welcome home." Days turned into weeks. The shop thrived again, fuller than ever. Grace found her rhythm there, answering phones, managing orders, sometimes even fixing small things herself. People in town started calling her our Grace, and she'd just laugh, cheeks turning pink. Ethan would glance over at her sometimes, that same small smile tugging at his lips, the one that said, "I can't believe you're really here." And Grace would meet his eyes with a look that said, "I can't believe it either." One late afternoon, after closing, Ethan sat outside on the porch steps, watching the sun dip behind the hills. Grace joined him, 2 mugs of coffee in her hands. She handed him one. "Still can't believe it," he said quietly. "It's ours." She smiled. "No, Ethan, it's yours. I just helped remind you how much it mattered." He shook his head. "You reminded me of a lot more than that." She looked at him, curious. "Like what?" He took a breath, eyes on the horizon. "That love doesn't always look like what you expect. Sometimes it shows up when you're broken, wearing a coat full of sawdust and hope." Grace smiled, eyes wet. "And what do you do when it shows up?" He looked at her, the setting sun catching in his eyes. "You hold on." And for the first time in a long time, he did. Stories like this don't happen just in movies. They happen when people choose forgiveness over pride. If that kind of love still matters to you, stick around. There's more where this came from. That night, as the lights in the shop flicked off, Grace turned the sign on the door one last time. But instead of closed, she'd written something new underneath in careful handwriting. "For Rachel, and for second chances." Ethan saw it, smiled softly, and whispered, "Yeah, for second chances." Do you believe some people are worth the wait? Drop a heart in the comments if the story reminded you that love can heal what loss leaves behind. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.